Takže milí přátelé, na řadě je další milý, vzácný a vynikající host, na jehož vystoupení jsem se od začátku velmi těšil. Je to Robert Fleischer, který přijel z Německa, žije v Lipsku a je v pozici jakéhosi koordinátora německé ufologie a exopolitiky a je zakladatelem v Německu tohoto oboru. Nebudu mluvit dlouho a ještě jednou říkám, těším se a předávám mu slovo. Děkuju.
Děkuji. Thank you. So thank you very much, Igor, for this nice introduction, which, to be honest, I haven't understood one single word of it, but I'm sure it was very nice. My name is Robert Fleischer. I'm from you're right from the neighborhood from Germany. I grew up in Karl-Marx-Stadt, which is now Chemnitz. So I went to your precious country a couple of times, and I've always enjoyed it, especially the Smrslina, or how you translate, or how do you pronounce it? I don't know. I was told it's called ice cream. That's the only word I remember from my childhood, from the Czech Republic. Let me tell you something about myself first. I'm a journalist, 34 years old. I used to work for television because I'd always wanted to become a journalist for television because I thought that there are so many interesting subjects that you could report on and which are important for mankind to know. And I didn't see those subjects on mainstream television, so I thought, well, just go there and do it myself, you know. I was pretty naive at that time, I must say, because it took me a couple of years working for television until I understood that television is not the place where you can report on the important things. So in June of 2007, I founded Exopolitics Germany, which is part of the Exopolitics Institute of Dr. Seller. We have been working mainly in the field of journalism. So we do not collect, or we are not whistleblowers ourselves, but we collect the evidence, and we do that because in Germany it's pretty difficult to talk about the whole subject. It's not like in Great Britain where you have the government, the Ministry of Defense releasing files, you know, tons and stacks of files, you know, which would occupy you for 50 years to go through every single sheet of it, you know. In Germany, it's really difficult. In my talk, I want to approach the UFO subject from the political perspective, what has become known in my country, how my government is dealing with UFOs, and as you will see, Exopolitics Germany so far has played a certain role in what you would elsewhere call a disclosure process. So disclosure, that's the famous word, which basically means that one day the government will have to admit that they know quite a lot more than what they publicly say they know about ET, visitation, and alien craft. I'm not sure if I'm one of those who doubts that this will ever take place, because I think that the government has has good reasons not to abolish its own role as the government, because this what would take place in my opinion. So we have a website. This is the website we have. It's a new website founded in June of 2007, and This website contains 3 sections. It's entirely in German, I'm sorry. It's neither in Czech, neither in English. A lot of my English colleagues complain about this, but it's because we make a lot of video reports and videos, films, documentaries, and it's difficult and it's expensive, and it costs a lot of time also to make English or international versions of it, but we're working on it. So we have 3 sections, because the thing is, when you talk about UFOs, you have 2 target groups. You have the completely uninformed public, which is, in my country, I would say 80% of the population. And you have those who know that there is something to it, and they do not want to hear about the basic facts anymore. You know, they would rather go for witness testimony, direct ET confrontation, sort of the things that we just heard from Joanna. So what happens when you confront the second target group with the basic information is that they become bored, and they will just switch off or change the website or whatever. And if you confront the first target group, the uninformed general public, with a very advanced knowledge about this, like questions, like for example meetings of US presidents with ETs, then they will, you know, this will cause them to completely shut down all their senses, you know, completely block away. It's called cognitive dissonance, because they just cannot grasp the information, because they do not have the basic knowledge that one should have in an informed debate. If you want to have an informed opinion, if you want to have an informed discussion. So we try to solve this problem by establishing several sections. This is exowissen, it's exo-knowledge. There you find all the primary information, like information that is both valuable for journalists and the public, because it enables them to do the research themselves. So I put a lot of attention in defining or in naming the sources where I have this information from, so that people can go and do the research themselves. Then we have a premium section, and this is where we hide the advanced knowledge from the eyes of the uninformed public, and people have to pay a membership fee to be able to access this second section, which is the Exo magazine. And then we have the Exo community, which is an online community with currently almost 3,000 members and activists who are part of Exopolitics Germany, some of whom contribute to our cause. Some of them are just there to exchange information among activists and members. And this is, by the way, my profile page. Yeah. So it's around 3,000. It's according to the counter on its front page, it's 2,942 members to be precise. So why are we doing all this? The Exo community is really important, because the subject of UFOs is something which doesn't exist at all in Germany, not in the public debate. You know, most people aren't even interested in it. Most people have heard that there's something like UFOs and it's ET craft, and we all know that it only comes from Hollywood movies and it's not real, you know. But on the other hand, there are many people who have had experiences themselves, and who just want to talk about what they found out, what they feel is important. And this Exo community gives them, for the very first time in Germany, actually, the means to discuss and to communicate about this online. So that's good, I think. As I said, there's no such thing as UFOs in Germany. And I think this is, from what I've heard, is probably the same in the Czech Republic, right? I don't know if your government, if you even know of government officials from the Czech Republic who have ever said anything about UFOs. Or are there politicians in the Czech Republic who say anything about it? No? No. Okay, so you see, we still have lots of things in common. So this is a former federal minister of the Interior who was once asked on an online platform about, you know, secret UFO projects in Germany and stuff. And he said, there's no federal authority or institution that registers, evaluates, or deals with alleged sightings of unknown flying objects. In fact, he said, there is no federal authority or institution known here that registers or evaluates or deals with alleged sightings of unknown flying objects. So I found this is an interesting statement, being the federal minister of the Interior. I think he should know if there is something or not, you know. And there have been some attempts by members of parliament, of the federal parliament, which is the Bundestag in Germany, the Bundestag, and they wanted to try out, they wanted to find out if the government knows anything, and they asked official questions, official inquiries, which they made to the German government. So this is, for example, a deputy from the Liberal Party, FDP. He wanted to know how many sightings of so-called UFOs or extraterrestrials in Germany has the German government registered since the year 2000. And does the federal government intend to release its files about UFO sightings too, now that the French and the British have published their files? You know, I think this is a justified question. Oh, by the way, I have to set up my timer here, my egg timer, because if I don't do it, we'll be standing here tomorrow. And the answer of the federal government is that it does not have any knowledge about sightings of so-called UFOs or extraterrestrials in Germany. Therefore, there are no such files about UFO sightings which are available for release. And there's also another deputy of the German Bundestag, so that's the federal parliament, who wanted to know how the federal government estimates the probability of the reality of intelligent extraterrestrial life, and how does it estimate the probability that extraterrestrials might land on German territory. And of course, the answer of the government is the German federal government does not have any knowledge which would allow to estimate the probability of the reality of extraterrestrial life. You see, the Germans, they like nouns, you know, that's why probability, reality. However, given current scientific knowledge, the likelihood of a landing of extraterrestrials on German territory is considered out of the question. Out of the question, you know, it's completely out of the question that ETs would ever land on German territory. And that is an astounding statement, I thought, because if you say it's out of the question, it means that it must be something that you suggest which is completely impossible, that nobody has ever thought of, you know, that it could ever occur. And in fact, there is a CIA document from 1952 discussing a UFO landing in Germany. This is not classified information or anything. It's just a report from a press report in Greece. Unevaluated information. That's what I wanted to say, but it says flying saucers in East Germany. So the report talks about Oskar Linke, who was a former East German mayor, and his daughter Gabriele, who were on their way home and had to leave their motorcycle when they had a flat tire. And inside the woods, the girl noticed two men in silvery suits examining the ground in a clearing near a pink disc-shaped object 13 to 50 meters in diameter, showing a double row of openings around the rim and a black conical tower on top. One of the men had some kind of a flashing box. Both men went inside when they were discovered, or when they realized that they were being watched by Oskar Linke, the mayor, and his daughter. And they went inside the disc. The disc vibrated, rose along the cone-shaped cylinder, and then spun faster and rose out of sight. And the witness described the object as some sort of a frying pan. And that's because in East Germany, in 1952, nobody had ever heard of flying saucers or UFOs, because that was not part of the communist, or let's say that was not part of the vocabulary that a good communist at that time had at his availability. So you see, the situation in Germany is basically comparable to two fish in a fish tank standing on a table somewhere in a living room, you know, next to a ringing telephone. Did you know that fish, they are supposed to have a memory of only 2 seconds? So when the fish, they make their rounds here in this glass, you know, whenever they cross this sign which says this way, swim this way, you know, it's always a new thing for the fish, you know. It's oh, since when is there a sign here? Oh, have you seen this sign before? Wow, there's a sign, have you seen this? So this is kind of the limited, let's say, level of consciousness that we dispose of. And one of, you know, if one of the fish ever dares to ask the question, you know, if one of the fish ever stops and dares to ask the question, do you think there's maybe something else out there we might not understand? Then the other fish will make sure that he will keep on swimming and stop asking questions. Come on, there's more important things to do in Germany. That's a situation, honestly. Nobody really cares about UFOs, and there's no serious news reporting on it. And it has been like this for 30, 40 years. But then suddenly, there was a big news report. Suddenly, the German mainstream press started reporting on the German Bundestag having a UFO secret. The headline here in this article says, "The Bundestag's X-Files." So remember, the Bundestag is the German federal parliament. And it has a scientific research service, which is a department of the Bundestag administration filled with scientists from all kinds of branches of science. And whenever a deputy of the German Bundestag needs scientific assistance, needs help and advice, not advice, but like factual help from scientists, they go to that department and say, could you make a study about this and that? I need it for my political decision. So it turns out that the Bundestag Scientific Research Service has redacted a UFO study, and in that study they say that they believe that the German government does unofficial UFO investigation. And this article deals with an upcoming trial in front of the Berlin Administrative Court regarding the release of that study, and that trial took place on December 1st, 2011. And this is the claimant, Frank Reitemeyer. There. The headline says, this Berlin citizen wants to open the Bundestag UFO files. And now he sued the Bundestag administration because he had tried to get access to that undisclosed UFO study undertaken by the Scientific Research Service of the Bundestag, and they denied it. So he did it again under the German Freedom of Information Act. I would like to know, by the way, do you have a Freedom of Information Act in the Czech Republic? You have, and for how long? 20 years? Okay, so that's great, you know, congratulations, because in Germany, the Freedom of Information Act is something that's relatively new. It's 6 years that we have the Freedom of Information Act. So freedom of information for the German government is a concept that is relatively new. And that is how they behave as well. So he made that Freedom of Information Act request and it was denied. So he sued the Bundestag administration for the release of that study. And the Bundestag says they won't have to release the study because it does not fall under the Freedom of Information Act, and in any case, they have the intellectual property rights of that study, and therefore the right of first publication, and they decide not to publish it, so basically, poop off, you know. That's what they say. I covered the trial, this trial in front of the Berlin Administrative Court, and I made the following short report for our website. Later I found out that some mainstream media, especially the Deutschlandfunk, which is a big public news network in Germany, they simply stole my parts of the interview and and broadcast it without asking me. But it's all right for me because, you know, that's after all the reason why we do this work. It's because we want to inform about the whole subject. So this is the report, and I hope that these fabulous, amazing conference interpreters will be able to interpret it real time from the subtitles that are in English.
Frank Reitemeyer ist kein Typ für halbe Sachen. Gerade hat er sich vor dem Verwaltungsgericht Berlin mit dem Bundestag angelegt und einen Etappensieg errungen. Das Gericht entschied, dass der Bundestag eine bislang geheim gehaltene Ausarbeitung über UFOs freigeben muss.
Ich will Fakten wissen und mich stört, dass in 20 Ländern, in Frankreich, in England, USA, Kanada, die Bürger die UFO-Akten einsehen können und ich als Deutscher von meiner deutschen Regierung nicht informiert werde. Es ist also so eine krasse Diskrepanz, wenn man sich das mal vorstellt. In Frankreich wird ein Staatsbürger automatisch von seiner Regierung informiert, weil die Regierung die UFO-Akten auf die Webseite der Weltraumbehörde stellt, also offiziell auf den Regierungsseiten, die sich die Dokumente befinden. Jeder kann sich die ansehen, kostenlos zu Hause. Ich als Deutscher in Deutschland muss also Faxe abschicken, Telefonate führen, Klage einreichen. Das ist mit Kosten und Stress verbunden und das finde ich nicht korrekt.
Konkret geht es um diese Ausarbeitung der wissenschaftlichen Dienste des Bundestages. Eine Abgeordnete ließ sie im November 2009 aufgrund einer Bürgeranfrage für Exopolitik Deutschland erarbeiten. Die Autoren des 10-seitigen Papiers, ein Politologe und ein Physiker, stellen darin die Vermutung auf, dass deutsche Bundesbehörden sich mit UFOs beschäftigen. So heißt es darin, Zitat: Die Tatsache, dass sowohl Großbritannien als auch Frankreich sich mit der Fragestellung nach der Existenz von UFOs und außerirdischen Lebensformen beschäftigten und dies nach vorheriger Geheimhaltung in den letzten Jahren sogar via Internet veröffentlicht haben, legt die Vermutung nahe, dass sich auch deutsche Behörden oder Ministerien mit dieser Fragestellung befasst haben bzw. befassen. Geheime UFO-Forschung auch in Deutschland? Da der Bundestag Frank Reitemeyer keine Akteneinsicht nach dem Informationsfreiheitsgesetz gewähren wollte, zog dieser vor Gericht. Doch der Prozess drehte sich nicht um die Frage, ob Deutschland seine geheimen UFO-Akten veröffentlichen muss.
tatsächlich geht es zunächst einmal darum, ob der wissenschaftliche Dienst des Deutschen Bundestages dem Informationsfreiheitsgesetz unterfällt und gleichzeitig, falls dies so sein sollte, ob dieser wissenschaftliche Dienst bzw. der Bundestag selbst sich auf Urheberrechte berufen kann. Dadurch, dass tatsächlich Ausarbeitungen vom wissenschaftlichen Dienst an die Abgeordneten gefertigt werden, bestimmt der wissenschaftliche Dienst auf eine gewisse Weise die Politik mit. Und ich bin schon der Meinung, dass das Informationsfreiheitsgesetz gerade für diesen Fall Anwendung finden müsste.
Und genau das versucht der Bundestag mit allen Mitteln zu verhindern. Denn was der wissenschaftliche Dienst liefert, sind, Zitat, keine Texte, die man veröffentlicht sehen möchte. Zitat Ende. Das Gericht sah es jedenfalls anders und erlaubte dem Kläger Einsicht in die Ausarbeitung. Der Bundestag hat bereits Berufung gegen das Urteil angekündigt und auch Frank Reitemeyer ist unzufrieden, denn er will, dass Deutschland die Akten für jedermann offenlegt.
Also ich versuche, alle rechtlichen Möglichkeiten auszuschöpfen. Da werde ich mich mit meinem Anwalt, Herrn Olaf Grunert, noch mal kurz schließen, was wir als nächsten Schritt jetzt machen. Aber mein Ziel ist ja die endgültige Freigabe der UFO-Akten, so wie das in 20 anderen Ländern auch üblich ist.
Und so wird es wohl nicht der letzte Prozess für Frank Reitemeyer und seinen Anwalt sein. Transparente Regierungsinformationen über UFOs, so etwas mag es vielleicht anderswo geben, in Deutschland jedenfalls noch nicht.
So in Germany we're still waiting for the government to understand what freedom of information is all about. I'll just turn this down here. All right. But wouldn't it be interesting to have access to the studies of the Scientific Research Service of the German Bundestag? After all, they do not only write studies about UFOs or whatever, you know, but they sometimes they also contribute to the dissertations of members of the parliament. I don't know if you are aware of our former defense minister. He had to leave his position as a defense minister. He was actually fired when it became public that the Scientific Research Service had contributed, diplomatically said, contributed to his dissertation in I think 16 cases, or let me put it otherwise. Somebody had commissioned studies at the Scientific Research Service, and he had just copied it into his dissertation. So that's fraud. That is why he lost his doctor title, and that is why he also had to leave his office. And I guess that's part of the reason why the Bundestag administration absolutely does not want that study to become public, because it would mean that, you know, it would be a fundamental decision. It would mean that each and every study ever undertaken by the Scientific Research Service would be open to the public, and the public could find out and try to find out for themselves who else has had certain contributions in his dissertations. So how many more doctor titles are at stake at the German federal parliament? That's what this trial is about. Is also about. So, but let's go back to the study done by the Bundestag Scientific Research Service. These are the front pages of these studies. It's actually 2 studies by the Scientific Research Service. This is the first one. It says, the search for extraterrestrial life and the implementation of United Nations Resolution A33426 about observation of unidentified flying objects and extraterrestrial life forms. And the second study is this one, called the European Union and its policy regarding unidentified flying objects. So, what is this United Nations resolution all about. I will come to that right now. You know, I do not have the right to publish the studies from the Scientific Research Service, even if I have them in their entirety. I have the whole thing, but I must not publish them. I'm not allowed to publish them. I can only quote from them as a journalist. So let me quote what the Scientific Research Service says in detail. They believe it is highly unlikely that the German government has never undertaken any UFO research because, they say here, there was a very pronounced sentiment of conflict between East and West back in 1978. So that was the Cold War, you know. Thus, at least in a military perspective, the interested parties at that time could very well have had a need to follow up on UFO reports or appearances and to investigate them. The actual or supposed development of new craft, spy satellites, etc. by the military opponent might have given enough reason for them in the past, also in Germany, to deal with such questions. And it is logical. I mean, think about it, you know, the Russians were afraid of the Americans, of the American drones. You know, Michael Seller said in his, showed in his presentation the example of the document that showed that the Americans were actually afraid the Soviets would use UFO staged sightings or appearances to cause paranoia or mass hysteria, so that they would use it for psychological warfare, you know. Also, the Russians were, of course, afraid of the Americans as well. And that is the main reason why they looked at unidentified flying objects. That's the main reason for that. So, you know, how likely is it that there was no investigation of UFOs in Germany, where the border, the front line of the Cold War, led directly through our country? How likely is that? So let's go to that United Nations Resolution A33426 from 1978, because this is really interesting to know that even if the subject of UFOs has been treated with so much ridicule by the mass media, it used to be a serious subject 34 years ago. It was so serious that it was even debated at the United Nations. And this is just a part of United Nations Resolution 33426. I quote, "The General Assembly invites interested member states to take appropriate steps to coordinate on a national level scientific research and investigation into extraterrestrial life, including unidentified flying objects, and to inform the Secretary General of the observations, research, and evaluation of such activities." So what exactly does the study from the Scientific Research Service of the Bundestag say about that resolution? Why was it never adopted in Germany? They say, resolutions adopted by the United Nations General Assembly are regularly treated as merely recommendatory. So they're just a recommendation. They are therefore not legally binding and impose no legal obligation, to take action. So that's all that they say about it, you know. But we still don't know why it wasn't adopted in Germany. This is just a presumption from the scientists who wrote this, you know. We still don't know what was going on at that time, how they reacted, why, you know. And what was the German position on it. And I had hoped to find the answer in that study of the Scientific Research Service, and I didn't find it. So I continued my research in this regard, and I went to several, you know, I did a couple of things. I approached several departments, authorities, and asked them that question. And then finally I had the idea to go to the Federal Foreign Office of the German government, because if they, you know, if that subject was talked about at the United Nations, then the German Federal Foreign Office should know. And so I went there at the political archives in Berlin, and it took me a couple of weeks, though, to find the files, and I found them, the German UFO files from the German Federal Foreign Office. And yeah, this is the cover page, and yeah, and what can I tell you? I made an official inquiry. I asked them for their permission to publish those files. And guess what? I'm not allowed to publish those files neither. They said, "What? You want to publish it? Mr. Fleischer," this is a quote from an email they sent to me after my inquiry. They said, "Mr. Fleischer, the Federal Foreign Office cannot give you permission to publish the files indicated in your request." Sorry for my bad English, this shouldn't say application, it should say request. "Those are official documents which must be protected from misuse and manipulation in the public. A publication by ufological organizations would bear that risk." I have to say, when I read this email, I used a very bad German swear word, and I don't even have any expression in English for what's my opinion about this, because I've worked with so many politicians, with so many people, you know, and so many journalists and mainstream media organizations, and there has never been even one of them who has ever dared to suggest that I would present manipulated information. So you see, I tend to take it personally, but of course, this is not a personal issue. And this is why I'm not going to look into the dictionary for the swear word I'm looking for. But of course, I'm a journalist. Being a journalist, maybe they can deny me to publish the file in their entirety, but I am allowed to quote from it, of course. So what you need for a quotation, you need the quotation marks, right? And yeah, so this is the first page. So here it says UFOs. This is a reference to 230 who used to deal with the correspondence between the German Federal Foreign Office and its permanent mission to the United Nations in New York. And let me just keep on quoting here. This is a telegram from West Germany's permanent mission to the United Nations to the Federal Foreign Office in Bonn from November 28, 1978. So that was one day after it was decided. And it says in this telegram, Grenada has presented a resolution draft on UFOs at the Special Political Committee, which proposes the establishment of an expert group that is supposed to define the framework for United Nations studies about the UFO phenomenon under the supervision of the Outer Space Committee. And then they go on to state, quite apart from the wider implications of such resolution draft, the reference to the Outer Space Committee alone has its misgivings, or is bad for us, as it would incur Grenada's desire to become a member of the Outer Space Committee, which would therefore be constantly occupied and dealing with the UFO question. So you see, they were afraid that the subject would be a regular subject on the table of the Outer Space Committee of the United Nations. And they are also afraid that there are wider implications. You know, what is going to happen if we start to seriously debate about UFOs? What would come out of that, you know? They were afraid of that. And then just my next quote, this is a telegram also from November 28th, 1978, from Germany's permanent mission to the United Nations to the Federal Foreign Office in Bonn. They say, the SPC, that is the Special Political Committee, will finish debating this item until the end of this week. Until then, the USA and Austria will try to persuade Grenada to withdraw their resolution draft, to take it back, you know, and to convince them of a general declaration which invites interested states to cooperate in a committee independent of the United Nations for the study of UFOs. So they let Mr. Gary have his day, as it was said in the British files, talking about the United Nations resolution. They let him present the resolution draft, and then afterwards they started a whispering campaign, according to Nick Pope, who used to be a Ministry of Defense official in Great Britain, who I interviewed about this, in order to convince Grenada to take this resolution back. And then the result is the resolution I have just presented, where the Secretary General only invites member states to, you know, coordinate UFO research on a national level. And in this letter from Germany's permanent mission to the United Nations, they go on to say, last year, and this was actually before, this was from September 6, 1978, it says, last year the other delegations had been in the awkward situation to decline Grenada's request in order to avoid embarrassment for the United Nations concerning this item. If Grenada still does not understand that, and it is because Grenada had actually presented a similar, or had done a similar approach the year before, in 1977. If Grenada still does not understand that, and at least in part, their action is aimed at gaining publicity, their item will probably be treated with much less scrutiny at the 33rd General Assembly and will be procedurally killed. I hope I translated that correctly into English. Killed by procedure. And the killing is actually what this meant was that the General Secretary Waldheim had already suggested the establishment of an ad hoc committee in which only voluntary delegations become active. So I found that interesting, and I also found interesting, what I found very interesting is that a colleague of us, Paola Harris, who's also part of the Exopolitics Institute, one day she wrote me an email while I was just, you know, researching all this, and she said, "Hey Rob, why don't you talk to Lee Spiegel?" I said, "Lee Spiegel?" She said, "Yeah, Lee Spiegel. He's a famous journalist in America. He works for the Huffington Post now. He used to host lots of radio shows for NBC and stuff. But the most important fact about him is that actually back in 1978, he was part of the whole approach of Grenada to establish a UFO department at the level of the United Nations. He was the one who brought all those experts together at that time. So this is an astronaut here. It's, what was his name again? Michael, can you help me? What? Gordon Cooper, exactly. Yeah, that's Gordon Cooper. He was, I think, the Gemini mission. He was the first Mercury mission. Yeah. So and he had interesting UFO sightings himself, being an astronaut. He had Jacques Vallée, who's a famous French astrophysicist. This is Claude Poher from France as well, who used to lead the French national UFO program. And they had Wellington Friday, and their original plan was the establishment of that UN body. And this is the press conference. By the way, this picture is not from November 27, it's from July, but this one is. This is the press conference. You can see Stanton Friedman, a very important UFO researcher worldwide. This is J. Allen Hynek, who used to be the chief investigator of the American Air Force to investigate UFOs. He was also part of that initiative at the United Nations at that time. And here you see Sir Eric Gary, Prime Minister of Grenada, and at his left side you see Wellington Friday, who was the ambassador of Grenada. And look who is this guy. This is Lee Spiegel. This is Lee Spiegel directly looking at Eric Gary. And he told me, why is it that he looked directly at Eric Gary? It's because Eric Gary kept on talking all the time, and he didn't let the other experts talk. But let's just let you explain, or let's show you Lee Spiegel, who will explain you himself what they did at that time. And this is just a short segment of an interview I did with him just recently.
In July of 1978, we arranged to have a meeting during the summer at the United Nations with the Secretary General, Kurt Waldheim. And the purpose of that meeting was to let him know what our plan was in November when we were going to do the actual presentation. And so the Secretary General wanted to know, well, who's going to be there, what's the purpose of it. And I believe at that point is when Eric Gary actually presented the resolution to the Secretary General and said, here is what we formally would like to do at the United Nations. And here are some of the people today who are going to help us with bringing it to the attention of the world body. And there were several pictures taken of all of us sitting around that table with the Secretary General, and at least one of those pictures has become pretty famous. It's been published many times around the world in books and magazines that show us there with astronaut Gordon Cooper, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Jacques Vallée, the Secretary General, me, and that picture kind of let the public know that there was something coming up at the United Nations about UFOs. All that we were trying to do was to create a very small committee, and like you said, an ad hoc committee. We were looking to get 3 people, 3 representatives. I even was volunteering to be one of those people. Just a few people who would sit there in a little office maybe and start getting information from countries around the world who wanted to share information. That's all that we were doing. That would not have cost a lot of money, wouldn't have involved a lot of man hours. I'm sure that the United Nations wastes a lot more money than we were asking them to supply for this kind of a venture. No, the bottom line was that the bigger countries like the United States and the Soviet Union didn't want any attention put onto UFOs. They had to stop it at all costs. And that's what happened. And so they basically embarrassed. It wasn't Grenada who was embarrassed. It was Great Britain. It was maybe Germany who were embarrassed to the point, or intimidated, might be a better word. They basically said, you know, you people should kind of get on board with the United States and the Soviet Union, because if we don't want anything coming out about UFOs, then you don't either. You know, pay attention to our lead and everything will be fine. And I'm sure that those were the kind of discussions that happened. That's the only thing that makes sense. And like I said, was it just a coincidence that Sir Eric Gary's entire future, political future, went away when his political structure was overthrown just a few months after our presentation at the United Nations? Boy, talk about your base. Well, that's just a question that I raise. I can't prove that. I'm not even going to try and prove it. But it was a big coincidence, I thought.
So, you know, the Prime Minister of Grenada, just to make this clear, the Prime Minister of Grenada was overthrown by the opposition leader in his country only a couple of months later, after the UFO presentation at the United Nations. And I think he was a political refugee then in the United States. And as Dr. Seller told me last night, he was taken into custody, security custody, for being a prime minister who had just lost his office. Now, yeah, that is a strange coincidence, I must say. And as you see, the subject of UFOs seems to be a subject that is pretty delicate, you know. You can easily lose your job if you start talking about it as a politician. Nevertheless, I have to say that it is an international, it is debated internationally, worldwide, and countries all over the world have been investigating UFOs. This is just the list of countries that I have researched, who have been doing UFO research. 19 countries worldwide have government files about UFOs. Military files, government files, some of which are official, some are unofficial. Some in some countries have civil authorities that deal with the subject. Others have military authorities. So, just to give you an idea about the vast number of countries where the UFO subject is taken so seriously that they have government authorities dealing with it. So you see blue countries here and gray countries, and then there are two underlined countries, Chile, Ecuador, and France. Oh, it's 3. So the blue countries are NATO allies. As you see, the subject of UFOs is being debated in NATO allied countries just as seriously as in non-allied countries. And you see in France, in Chile, and Ecuador, there are civil authorities concerned with the UFO subject. And it is from those countries that we know that we have some scientific data about UFO occurrences. Let's take, for example, the French. The French have a UFO study group, which is an official department of their space agency. It's called CNES, Centre National d'Études Spatiales, Center for Space Studies. And its department, it's like NASA in France, okay? And its department, it's the GEPIN, Groupe d'études et d'information sur les phénomènes aérospatiaux non identifiés. So it's the study and information group of an unidentified aerial phenomena. That is how they call the UFO phenomenon, unidentified aerial phenomena. So this is official UFO information from France, okay? You can find it on this website, the official website of the French National Space Agency. Maybe you want to write that down, Centre National d'Études Spatiales. And you can see how many cases they have investigated here. And this is a very interesting chart because it shows you that they differentiate between 4 types of unidentified phenomena. Category A are the phenomena which can be perfectly identified. It's 11%. Category B is phenomena which are probably identified. So that means that if somebody sees something in the sky and it moves in a certain direction and they make a UFO report, then the first thing they will do is they will take out their star map and see if it's Venus or so, or if it's the International Space Station. And if they find that the International Space Station on that very day, at that very time, at the very same time, has taken the same course, then it is most probably the International Space Station. And then category C is unidentifiable phenomena. That means that they cannot identify the phenomena because they do not have sufficient information on it. But then there is still a category D of 22% of real unidentified aerial phenomena. And that means that those 22%, they are not they're not identified because they didn't have the data, but because they did have all the data and they couldn't identify it anyway. And there are landings, cases of landings, physical interaction between a craft, environment, beings who were seen, you know, even by the gendarmerie, by the police, the French police. And what's also interesting, and you know, I really love the French for having published this report. And this should make you, if you're a skeptic, I guess there are only some few skeptics in this room, so I think it doesn't, you know, doesn't serve me anything if I ask you to raise your hand if you're a skeptic. But anyway, if you're a skeptic, you should get that study, because it's a 3-year military study from high-ranking French officials who worked in the surroundings, in the environment of the French. And here is the conclusion. Oh, by the way, most important thing about the report is its title. The title is UFOs and Defense, What Should We Prepare For? UFOs and Defense, What Should We Prepare For? And this is, as I said, a 3-year military study by high-ranking French officials. So let me just quote from a part of their conclusions about the UFO phenomenon. This is in French, but I read it in English. I'm sorry, you know, it's not, maybe not the best idea for a German to translate a French text into English, but I had no choice, so I'll try my best. The studies show physically documented evidence for the reality of absolutely unknown flying objects with remarkable flight and sound characteristics that are apparently driven by intelligent beings. These flying objects are very impressive for both military and civil pilots who are reluctant to speak out. Their fear of being ridiculed, etc., is the reason for them to remain silent. Secret craft of terrestrial origin, like drones, etc., can only explain a minor part of the cases. One can clearly perceive the limits of this explanation going sufficiently back in time. And then they go on to state, there is only one hypothesis that sufficiently takes into account the facts and relies essentially on today's science. It is the hypothesis of extraterrestrial visitors. There you see it. C'est celle des visiteurs extraterrestres. And they go on to state, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is by far the best scientific hypothesis. Of course, it is not categorically proven, but there are strong indications for it to be real, and if it is correct, there are a lot of consequences. And I think this study should be compulsory for all the skeptics who keep on claiming that there is nothing to the UFO phenomenon, because I must ask questions: how many people who are skeptics, and when I say skeptics, I mean ideological skeptics, because I am skeptical myself. I am, I'm critical. I do not believe each and everything I hear. But there are people out there, and for them it's an ideology, especially in Germany. They don't want it to be true because it just cannot be, But I have to ask the question: how many of those people have their own radar device on the roof of their house? How many of them have onboard radars? How many of them are trained observers? How many of them know what is going on in aviation? That's the kind of people who wrote this report. So you see, the UFO phenomenon is not that it will have some implications if we start talking about it, but it already had implications. Let me show you the testimony of the former chief of the air staff of the Belgian Air Force, who talks about the Belgian UFO wave. There was a wave of UFO sightings, triangular objects, like this one. Now, recently there has been some debate of whether or not this photo is real, but it doesn't really matter, because this photo was taken at the very end of the Belgian UFO wave, and the witnesses always described it the same. So let me show you what he said about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Wilfried de Brouwer. I'm a retired Major General of the Belgian Air Force, and I was Chief Operations in the Air Staff at the time that an exceptional UFO wave took place over Belgium. Indeed, during the evening of 29 November 1989, in a small area in eastern Belgium, approximately 140 UFO sightings were reported. Hundreds of people saw a majestic triangular craft with a span of approximately 120 feet, powerful beaming spotlights moving very slowly without making any significant noise, but in several cases accelerating to very high speeds. The following days and months, many more sightings would follow. The UFO wave would last more than a year, during which a Belgian UFO organization conducted more than 650 investigations and recorded more than 400 hours of audio witness reports. On one occasion, a photograph revealed the triangular shape and 4 light beams of the object. I have the photograph here if you want to see more details later on, but at the left, at your left, you see the original photograph. At the right, you can see an overexposed photograph which reveals the shape of the craft. Belgium had no official focal point for reporting UFO sightings. Nevertheless, in my function of Chief Operations, I was confronted with numerous questions about the origin and nature of these craft. In first instance, and in consultation with other NATO partners, I could confirm that no flights of stealth aircraft or any other experimental aircraft took place in the airspace of Belgium. In addition, the civil aviation authorities confirmed that no flight plans had been introduced. This implied that the reported objects or craft committed an infraction against the existing aviation rules. The Belgian Air Force tried to identify the alleged intruders and on 3 occasions launched F-16 aircraft. On one occasion, 2 F-16 registered rapid changes in speed and altitude which were well outside of the performance envelope of existing aircraft. Nevertheless, the pilots could not establish visual context, and the investigation revealed that specific weather conditions may have caused electromagnetic interferences and false radar returns. The technical evidence was insufficient to conclude that abnormal air activities took place during that evening. In short, the Belgian UFO wave was exceptional, and the Air Force could not identify the nature, origin, and intentions of the reported phenomena. Thank you very much.
So just imagine the chief of staff of the Belgian Air Force publicly states that the Air Force was unable to identify the intention and origin of this phenomenon. What does it mean? Why does he talk about intentions? I will jump over a certain part in my presentation now because I know that we are behind the schedule. So, what is going on? If you ask the United States Air Force, there's nothing going on at all. This is the official United States position on UFOs. It's considered the official US position on UFOs. No UFO reported, investigated, or evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. There was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that unidentified sightings represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And since the termination of Project Blue Book, nothing has occurred that would support a resumption of UFO investigations by the Air Force. Now let's analyze what they are saying here. They are saying whatever they have investigated, it has never shown any indication of a threat to the national security, and what they have analyzed never represented technological developments or principles beyond our current scientific knowledge. Maybe, maybe the Americans, maybe they should have asked the Swiss, people from Switzerland. Look at this. This is a radar trace of a UFO on Swiss military radar from June 18, 1993. I got this from a scientist, astrophysicist, and head of a German UFO organization, MUFON, which also exists in Europe, MUFON Central European Section, and the head of that organization and we work closely together, and he gave me this radar trace of Swiss military, of a UFO on Swiss military radar. Now what's so interesting about this is that, on June 18, 1993, the radar operators were sitting there in their control tower, and they were trying to identify this object, which was traveling with 240 kilometers per hour, so which is not very fast, And they tried to identify this object because it did not have a transponder signature. Transponder signature means that each plane has a sender, and it emits radio waves so that you can identify the plane, so that everybody knows this is plane Lufthansa, going there and there. And this object didn't have anything. So while they were investigating, while they were trying to find out what this object is, it suddenly accelerates to Mach 4. So that's 4 times the speed of sound. And it makes a sharp angle at Mach 4 and disappears from the radar screen. And it doesn't It didn't disappear from the radar screen because it really disappeared, but because the Swiss military radar was not able to capture any objects that were faster than Mach 4 at that time. Why would they? There are no terrestrial objects that can fly Mach 4, at least not officially. Now, what's interesting is the sharp angle. How can you make a sharp angle at Mach 4, at 4 times the speed of sound? We have natural laws. There is one natural law, which is, I think, the mass inertia law. Mass inertia law. Mass inertia means that once you set a certain mass in motion into a certain direction, you will need a lot of energy to divert it from its original course, and it will cause damage to that object. I mean, otherwise said, if you go 80 kilometers per hour and then you grab your steering wheel and you just go, what's going to happen? Do you think you will drive a sharp angle on your motorway? You will not. Your car will crash. You will possibly die. So you shouldn't try this unless you are a UFO. So you see, this object, this radar trace is a direct contradiction to the official United States position on UFOs, that they do not represent any technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge, because these objects do not only not accept our aviation laws, they do also not accept our natural laws. There you see another radar trace. It shows, it's a flight level profile, okay? So it shows, this is the flight path seen from above, but this is the flight level, okay? So here you can see that on June 13, 1993, this object showed extreme changes in its flight level. It changed its flight level in several thousand meters higher or lower within 6 minutes. If you ask a pilot, I don't know, do we have a pilot here in the audience? No pilot. Okay. Because I have a pilot in my team, and I asked him, in my Exopolitics team in Germany, and I asked him which kind of craft would be capable of flying this, and he said it's impossible. You cannot be a helicopter, can be nothing. Not this. It's just completely unknown, unthinkable. And there's another thing about radar traces. Once we talk about radar traces, you know, is that UFOs are, interestingly enough, they are obviously interested in terrestrial military installations. You see it here. On May 5, 1996, the square that you see here in red, this is the no-fly zone around a NATO station, military station. There should be nothing whatsoever within that no-fly zone, and you still have unidentified radar returns. And this is a common thing. There is one last witness testimony that I want to show you before I leave you, because I see my egg timer has already run up. As I said, UFOs are interested in terrestrial military installations, and that is something that we should be concerned about. What does it mean? Let me show you the witness testimony of a former Air Force captain. He was stationed in March 16, 1967. He was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. He was responsible for nuclear weapons that were stationed there, because it was the Cold War, you know, Cold War. So it's a very important military installation. And look what happened. By the way, this is an excerpt from a press conference by those high-ranking military officials, which we were given permission to publish, and we seized this opportunity to subtitle it.
My name is Robert Salas. In 1967, I was a first lieutenant stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. I was a missile launch officer, and on March 24th, 1967, I was on duty at what we called Oscar Flight. It is a underground capsule hardened site, about 60 feet underground. We had security guards topside. The main guard is called a flight security controller. My commander at the time was Lieutenant Fred Mywald, now retired Colonel Fred Mywald. Sometime in the evening hours on March 24th, I received a call from one of my topside guards, the flight security controller, stating that they had been observing strange lights in the sky making odd maneuvers and wanted to report it. I thought it was kind of a strange report, but I took it seriously. You have to understand we were protecting nuclear weapons, and the reports we generally got were very professional. At any rate, I kind of dismissed the call. He called back about 5 minutes later. This time he was screaming into the phone saying they're looking at an object, a red glowing object hovering just above our front gate. This object was about 30 feet in diameter. He couldn't make out too much of the details of the object, only that it was pulsating, and he had all the guards out there. He was very frightened, wanted me to give him direction. I think I said something like, make sure nothing comes inside the perimeter fence. He immediately hung the phone up. I went to wake my commander, Fred Mywald, who was taking a rest break. Started to tell him about the phone call, and just as I told him, our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition, or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled while this object was still hovering over our site, our launch control facility.
I will interrupt here. Just to sum it up what he just said, he said that he was informed by his security guards that there was an object that hovered over the launch control, the launch site of these nuclear missiles. And the nuclear missiles that were there to protect the United States of the evil Soviet or Czech missiles or Eastern German missiles, they were suddenly shut off. They were shut down while the object was hovering there. So this case has also been subject to a certain investigation by the Air Force. And here in this document, which is a document that Robert Salas received through the Freedom of Information Act in America, it states the fact that no apparent reason for the loss of 10 missiles can be readily identified is cause for grave concern to this headquarters. And I have to tell you, well, if you are in the Cold War with an ideological opponent and there is suddenly something that switches off your main defense capability, now that would definitely cause you grave concern, wouldn't it? And it is also another contradiction to the official United States position on UFOs. Because if a UFO tampering with nuclear missiles is not considered a threat to national security, then what could possibly be considered a threat of national security. This is the threat of national security. Again, I'm coming to the end now. This is what Michael Seller has already talked about. There are very important questions that we have to ask as mankind. What does it mean for us that we are being visited by something, by objects, possibly beings that show intelligent behavior, that are superior to our technological capabilities, to our scientific knowledge? I mean, it seems like that, you know. It's obvious that it's like that. Excuse me, I still forgot to translate this. It says, important questions for mankind. How do they get here? You know, do they come with oil? I'm sure they do not come with oil if they travel to Earth. Do they come with nuclear power? Do they have another technology, perhaps? You know, the interesting thing about oil is that it's that we use oil to fulfill 36% of our global energy demand is fed by oil, 36%. There's an oil industry which basically controls the rest of the industries of the world because they are dependent on oil. Just imagine what would happen if we wouldn't need oil anymore, you know. It would not only change the technologies we have at our disposal, at our disposition, how do you say it in English? It wouldn't only change the technologies that we have, it would also considerably change the power structures on our planet. Because everybody in this room knows that the importance of the United States dollar can only be justified, if at all, if it can be justified at all, because it is the main currency for any transactions, financial transactions in the oil sector. If the US dollar wouldn't be used for oil transactions, then you know I'm wondering if it would exist anymore, the US dollar. So it would considerably alter the power structures on our planet. The other thing is, if you start to ask yourself questions, well, if there are beings who come here, who visit us, do they live in societies? How is their society organized? Do they have a head of state? Do they have ministries? Do they have homeless people? Do they have terrorists? You know, do they have wars? Why do they kill each other? You know, or oh, maybe they don't kill each other. Maybe there's another chance. You know, another thing what we could do. Or what is the highest tax rate in the extraterrestrial society? Or are there taxes at all in extraterrestrial societies? Is there money at all? Or is there possibly something else that they use to organize their society? And if so, is there maybe a way that we as mankind could benefit from these thoughts, you know, from the not only an alternative model, but just the possibility that there is an alternative. Because we are always being told that this is, you know, real politics, we have to invade them because they have this weapons of mass, huh? You know that, you know. You have to pay taxes because we need the money, because we need to pay our debts, because da-da-da. You know, all these little terrestrial problems would suddenly change if we start to consider the extraterrestrial presence as a fact. And what about religion, by the way? What about the ETs? Do they believe in God? You know, are they allowed to have sex before marriage? Do they have to carry a veil? Like the Muslims, you know. And what about technology? What about science? What about all those things? That's the reason, in my opinion, that we all should be concerned with the UFO phenomenon, especially politicians, especially people who take decisions, and each and every person on this planet. Because honestly, I think that the UFO subject has been kept secret for way too long by the people who rule this world. And this is not a question anymore of secrecy or national security, but we are now talking about the ongoing evolution of mankind, you know. And I am convinced that evolution of consciousness in the universe is a guided process, is a directed process, and it will not be stopped by some stubborn, power-driven people who try to keep on ruling the world, because they have the whole universe against them. So evolution of mankind will not be stopped just because some people say, no, we want to keep it secret. So please check your facts for yourself. Please make up your mind. Do not believe anything I just said. Please look after it yourself and make up your own opinion and see the importance of this subject for mankind. Thank you very much for your attention.